Hello, one and all. Welcome back to another episode of Classing Up the Joint, the only show that dares to ask the question, can I get Patrick with his gag twice?
Yeah. Let's fucking go.
I'm your host, Colin. I use they and he pronouns. I am the creative director and do many things here at the Roll Report, and I am joined once again by the delightful, the fantastic, the talented Patrick Perini. Say hi, Patrick.
Yeehaw.
Ye fucking ha. Patrick, to refresh, you give us the little, who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick Perini. I use he, they pronouns, and I am your resident insufferable multi-hyphenate. I do a little bit of everything. I am a writer. I am an aspiring composer, a voice actor, and most notably, the showrunner over at Unbalanced Encounters, a pretty damn good narrative play podcast where I am frequently the GM and also the stopgap for every other fucking job that goes into a podcast, as I'm sure Colin can empathize
I don't know
with.
anything at all about that, Patrick. Nothing.
Ooh, yeah, it's fun.
Yeah,
that's me.
Yeah, and it's a great podcast, and we'll, gonna have all the links and all the things. It's been a hot minute since you and I got to talk and do the interview portion, although we've been doing other stuff. But knowing that we'll be releasing this episode in a couple weeks, what's going on with Unbalanced Encounters?
Yeah.
These days, award nominations and
award-winning show.
Yes!
Award-winning show.
I did remember.
We got it. I think it was December 31st. Hollywood Series Webfest out of LA came in and awarded us with Best Story of an Actual Play. We got our first award at the tail end of last year. Since then, we have gone on to be nominated for, 5 or 6 more across a couple different Webfests in 2025, nominating largely the back half of Rally. Our award was for the first half of Rally. If you're not familiar with Unbalanced Encounters, what are you doing here?
Go listen. Stop right now. We'll still be here. Go catch up on the show.
Unbalanced Encounters is we like to call it a narrative play podcast. It is an actual play podcast. It's a very heavily edited actual play podcast. We usually play for about 3 hours and then edit that down into an hour and a half, give or take, of what we consider to be sort of audio drama quality play. So we are sort of using the game to create these really highly polished sort of narrative stories. And I say stories plural, but the vast majority of our show was roughly 80-something episodes of our first season, Rally, which was one large campaign, D&D 5e, 2014 rules, and level 1 to, I think we finished at 10 or 12. So it was a big sort of multi-year campaign. Very, very sort of twangy and, kind of rural fantasy, things that are very near and dear to our heart. And so we did. We won an award at the end of last year. We've been nominated for several more for Rally. And, kind of in the offing, we have been preparing for our second season, which is a radical goddamn departure from Rally. Anyone who's tried to sort of run an actual play or even listen to an actual play generally is confronted with this idea of like, oh, I have to strap in for 200 hours of content.
It's like starting Lost 20 years after publication when you're like, there's 9 seasons and 25 episodes of each one.
If you're a One Piece fan, this shit's for you, right? But if you're like a well-adjusted human adult, it could get a little stressful. There's a lot of
those are hard to find these days.
It's not me. But we were releasing sort of bi-weekly. So we were on this pretty crazy cadence of recording an episode and then the next week releasing an episode, then recording an episode and so forth and so on for almost 3 years, nonstop. And that was hectic. It was very, very stressful and never really having a proper chunk of time off was very difficult, especially because, we had some big life changes. A lot of our cast sort of moved across the country or from England, things of that ilk.
Yep.
And so going into season 2, we kind of had a blank slate. We were kind of presented with an interesting opportunity to say, hey, what do we want this thing to be going forward? How can we make it maybe a little easier on us, but also a little easier on the audience and a little bit more of a show that is I think, uniquely us and also kind of digestible, right? That's it's like split into kind of a cadence that is a little bit more accessible for folks. And we did a lot of soul searching, and what we came up with was this idea that was really sort of the inception of it was in a Patreon thing that we had been doing throughout Rally, which is that for our patrons, we had been doing these little 3-episode bonus arcs where we would bring on a guest, shake up who was the GM, change systems. As a matter of fact, one of our more popular ones used Rapscallion, which just released from Magpie Games.
I will say that I just got my book, and I am so excited to play this. It's
tremendous
beautiful.
amount of fun.
I'll throw that link into. Go check out Rapscallion if you are looking for incredible, very narratively driven, low math and kind of low dice rolling pirate experience and adventure. Super fun.
Really good game. Really good game.
Yeah.
We played that for our sort of Odyssey bonus arc, and it was just sort of an experiment for our patrons. But the hook to these bonus arcs was that they were all set in the same world as Rally. They were all set in sort of the region that we call Astilla, and that allowed us to jump around in the timeline and do this crazy sort of spider web of world building, some of which was completely peripheral. I think the Rapscallion game that we did only sort of lightly touched on the magic systems and some of the geopolitics of the world, some of which, like Small Gods Scatter, what ended up being full backstory in a way that was incredibly cool. Emily got to play her character from Rally, her character's grandmother, and kind of through sort of some really formative events that were incredibly meaningful for Emily's sort of main character. And so we got to explore these like weird kind of Dutch angles on the world that we were creating together with new people who, one of the people we had, Hunter Thompson, on, who Janasi Kwa on TikTok and Instagram, great guy, came on really early in the bonus arc process and sort of changed my brain chemistry about the way that the BBEG for the Rally campaign was going to work. And it became this thing that was sort of so deeply embedded in like folktale and like the actualization of, kind of folklore that it shifted the way I wanted to end the show. And so we loved sort of playing in that space, and we decided for season 2, we're going to just do that. So we're breaking things up into arcs that are going to be sort of these more digestible stories. We're changing the cadence of sort of our recording structure. And as a matter of fact, as of this conversation, we are, I think, 2 days away from recording the final episode of the first arc. And I am very excited about it.
Yes. I love so many things about this. I think the Dutch angles is a really great metaphor for because I talk a lot about how collaborative storytelling drives a lot of RPGs and a lot of, I think, the best of actual plays, whether they're podcast or visual form or whatever. And you need to be able to tell this kind of interwoven, braided story that, as I am rereading one of my old favorite fantasy series, I'm likening to sort of like Celtic knotwork and this kind of thing where everything is over and under and through itself. And you get to look at the whole from this very different perspective when you add, going back to letting the metaphor go for a moment, like when you add these different time periods of your main story and different characters, you're able to see how it all threads together that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is something I'm a very big fan of. Asking the question, why is this story told in this medium? Right. Yeah. Emily, I'm sure, can confirm this. Emily is my wife and also on Unbalanced Encounters with me. I complain about video games all the time with something to the effect of, this should have been a fucking movie. No one involved in this game understands play as a science. No one has studied play as a science. Yeah. No one is thinking about feedback loops. No one is thinking about like the joy at being the cause, right? Like it's not there, right? There's no play here. It's just a string of thin platforming mechanics strapped into what is a good movie. It should have been a fucking movie.
Well, I mean, I will say with games, sometimes what bugs me is when there is something good and then they have hired a mediocre to terrible voice actor to voice characters that actually have important plot points.
Certainly does not help.
Oh
Certainly
God, the
does not
writing
help.
of this is good, but you did not pick the person to do the voice, or you picked the wrong fucking robot, as it might have been.
Yeah.
You know.
But broad point here is that I think that actual play, we often find actual play kind of sitting in a situation where it should have been an audio drama, right? Not always.
Yeah.
And I think that some of the better shows that are also often the more popular shows lean into the improvisational kind of elements in it, I think in a really cool way. But a lot of the time when you get, sort of your award-winning actual plays that do well at the festivals and stuff, it probably should have been an audio drama. It was something that, like, it's so heavily refined and so heavily pre-planned and considered that it's not really doing anything as the medium that it is, right? It's just sort of sitting in this middle ground. I mean,
I was going to say, I think it is what many of them try to keep intact is the sense of randomness that you get from whatever game system you're in. Otherwise, I would argue things like Worlds Beyond Number and honestly, at times, certain episodes of Unbalanced Encounters, I'm like, this is a drama. This feels like it was scripted because of how deep some of the players are willing to go into their character and create these truly beautiful narrative moments. And at the same time, when you script it, you lose both the improvisational nature and the sudden random moments that can happen there, and the element of chance from rolling a dice to see if the thing you want happens or not.
100%. And I think that is, long-winded. That's the sort of point that I'm building to, which is that it's the intersection of chance and collaboration that makes actual play distinct. Yeah. And that, if you can build something, do something in the medium that really focuses on those elements, that is what makes it meaningful. That is why you should be doing this as an actual play and not as an audio drama, right? Because you are opening the door for the players, not just at one table, but potentially at many tables, for the dice, for the mechanics, not just from one system, but potentially intersectional across multiple systems, to dictate fact about the world that then you come together to figure out, what does this mean? How does this all fit together in a tapestry that could never have been made in any other way? And that's when you've nailed, that's why this is this medium. Yeah. And that is when you've created something really, really great. And that's what we're shooting for. And so we brought on, I think, 6 or 7 new cast members, many of whom we're going to meet throughout the course of the year as we sort of do more than just this first arc. The first arc is largely, not entirely, but largely the rally cast. Sure. And we want more voices, we want more intersectional ideas, and we're also going to be playing with new game systems as well. Precisely for that, precisely so that we can kind of create this interweaving of decision that makes the world together. Yeah.
This leads into something that I want to ask you about before we move on to Monks, whenever we do that, which is kind of how the world building for this second season is going, as much as you can share. Both in the sense that, it sounds like, again, these different arcs are going to happen at different collective times and different areas of the world that we're building, and how, you and the rest of the story team, or however the creative team is working, is compiling these pieces and making sure that everything will eventually, kind of have that braided tapestry effect of this all is, in fact, pieces of one cohesive story, or at least one cohesive world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the way that we're doing it is really not too similar from the way that we did it in Rally, which is we work vibes first in, I think, a very big way, right? One thing that I've actually been told a couple times recently is atypical of how we organize things. I think actually Dungeon Master of None, Emily and I were on recently, and they called me out as this being interesting and different, and I was like, you guys aren't doing this? We use mood boards to do almost all of our planning. Almost none of our planning is done verbally. Almost none of our planning is done in plot points. Almost none of the planning is done in really even established fact. That's not that
Sure.
by the time that we have like specific character backstory and stuff, it usually gets a little bit more concrete. It's like, oh, these are the parents that are still in the picture. These are the NPCs that I'm connected to. Like that stuff does get a little bit more tangible. But from the kind of inception point, we start with a mood board, and I did our mood board. Actually, our crew came together for the mood board for this first arc, and we had sort of two. We had one that we wanted to represent the world at large, which was I think like 4 pictures. It was really thin, and then we had one that we needed to represent. That we wanted to represent this particular story, and that was a lot more robust. That was kind of a bigger document, but it was screen grabs from things that we liked. I know that the Fire Nation capital shows up like 3 times in sort of, oh, this is what this particular geography looks like for this area, right? That kind of thing. Visuals, motifs, feelings that we want eventually to convey to the audience or what we're trying to represent in those mood boards. And then that's the jumping off point for the player characters to go away, come up with their character concepts and bring them back. And then once we do that, that's where we start to flesh things out. So I was not committed to almost any of the world. I had like 1 or 2 sort of NPC-oriented subplots that I wanted to potentially run. I had the sort of general pitch for the show, which was literally sort of 1 line. But I did not have a lot of depth beyond that. We really kind of go in with a blank page. And so what started with a little bit of a peek behind the curtain before we've announced any of this officially.
Exciting.
What started with some sort of light touch, kind of gold rush Western aesthetics. In that way that Unbalanced Encounters stories, they're very kind of twangy. We're going a little bit further west as opposed to further south in this particular one. But in that space, right, we were like, hey, let's take a look at some of the Westerns that we like and try to understand why we like them and try to figure out what, because you don't want to capture all of it. They're often very problematic, but what about them do we want to capture? We tried to sort of communicate that in, and some people, I think like Emily in particular, really gravitated toward something that sat very solidly in that genre.
Yeah.
Cinder, maybe not surprising anyone who's familiar with our cast, gravitated towards something that was completely orthogonal to that. And landed on wanting to introduce this really sort of robust element of kind of classic fantasy, sort of almost D&D fantasy, hag magic into this space. And as soon as he said that, my job is to say yes, right? And I say yes. And then I say, but what does that mean? And so we have conversations about like, hey, what do we actually want these people to be like? What do we want this stuff to look like and feel like in this world? What do we want this to capture and make us think and feel? And how do we sort of grow that into the roots of this place? And so it became an incredibly important part of his character, an incredibly important part of the world. And as we're starting to think about additional stories that we could tell, there were little 1-line pitches that we were sitting on that all of a sudden get me thinking, oh, that actually intersects with this place that is rife with hag magic that we've already said exists in the world, with this time period that could potentially work for telling this story. And so it's a lot about leaving the open space. Powered by the Apocalypse games say leave blank spaces on maps. It's very much in that sort of kind of vein. That really truly allow the players to start filling things in. So when they suggest something, the GM, the showrunner, the other GMs, the story team can all be like, oh, that plugs into this, and this seems really obvious for a good fit for this, and this maybe answers this question, and that's actually worth its own story, and it just grows out of there.
Cool. I love that. Hello, rollers! It is I, your host, debatably friendly DM, and other things, Colin, here to welcome you to the mid-roll. Thank you for listening, and we hope you are enjoying this episode so far. This is your periodic interruption, brief as it may be, to remind you that The Roll Report is on many social media platforms. You can find us around the interwebs at The Roll Report Cast, on Instagram, on TikTok, and on Blue Sky. We don't do the other thing. We don't talk about the artist formerly known as Twitter. But you can follow us there for news and announcements, special clips from the interviews you may not have seen, and learn about who we're going to interview next. Because if you are very intrigued and curious about upcoming interview guests, if you head on over to patreon.com/The Roll Report and give us a single dollar, you can submit questions for our interviews, and only you and only our other supporters on Patreon will hear the answers. That's right, special Patreon-only Q&As with interview guests if you support us there and if you send us questions. Thank you so much for listening. Back to the show. Enjoy! This made me think for a moment. I just wrapped up a game with my teenagers, and what we've transitioned to like trying to do a campaign with them rather than like, they basically sign up for 8-week plus sessions with me, but I've had the same 5-6 kids for like a full school year now.
Yeah.
So we're starting this longer campaign, and one of them just keeps inventing new ways that the strange magical flying city that they live in have magically evolved bugs of different kinds to take care of their sewer problem and like run their infrastructure. And I'm like, you think I'm not writing this down and it won't all come back to bite you in the ass later.
That's great. That's great. I love that shit. That's really fun.
I really love leaving the blank spaces on the map, leaving blank spaces in the world, because so much is going to come organically as you start playing, or even just as these conversations about the building happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I want to ask also if creating the bonus arcs for Rally came from a similar process, or that was not too trivialized, but like, we'd like to do something special for our Patreon patrons. Let's do another little thing. Or somewhere in the middle.
Colin B, I think, in a big way. We really did want to do something special for our patrons because at the time we had seen like a 10x increase in listenership just through some other marketing that we had done. And that was sort of seeing some conversion for Patreon, but we wanted to see if we could substantiate that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And do what you're good at. We're good at telling these stories.
Yep.
That was a line of thinking. But the other sort of parallel line of thinking was that we had tried to say like, oh, how could we do some alternative content where it's other, some of the other players maybe get to be GM, and they, kind of we sort of pass that baton around. Maybe we bring in guests, because guests are obviously a big thing in sort of all actual plays, and we didn't really have a format for that. We did have a guest on our second arc, Sayer Roberts, who's also our composer. Has grown to become one of my most dear friends. But it was very hectic trying to coordinate 5 people. So we were like, we don't want to do that again. So how do we incorporate guests? And we just couldn't make all the pieces fit together until someone, and I think it was Cinder, suggested, what if I just didn't do world building? Right? What if I just set it in Astilla, in the world of Rally? And that one very simple idea kind of blew the doors open on like, oh, yeah, you want to tell this like little gritty westerny story, which would eventually become The Hateful Fate, which is a bonus arc that we did years ago at this point, that I got to play, and it's the only time I've been a player on Unbalanced Encounters. It was a tremendous amount of fun.
So far,
right?
Patrick.
I am scheduled for later this year. We'll see.
All right,
but he did a little 2-shot.
Yeah.
And we had a couple of conversations, kind of about sort of the world building, the lore, and we found a great opportunity to really substantiate the backstory of one of the NPCs using this sort of parallel narrative. And that had such a positive response from our audience, from our patrons, that we're like, we need to do more of this.
Yeah.
This is something that people love. The like, I want to say cinematic universe sort of energy, because I think people genuinely do like a cinematic universe, but I also think that Marvel has sort of watered that down to the point where it's very clearly kind of cash cow and not interesting.
I mean, yes, and they don't own a copyright on the language, and particularly I think the way that Unbalanced Encounters tends to operate is in a much more cinematic and audio drama space, and their audio drama universe doesn't quite have the same ring to it.
Right. But I think that when you're thoughtful about how all of these narratives sort of intersect, and it's very clear that you're telling a coherent story and not a just keep milking it until it's dead
Sure.
story, I think you really do get some good positive feedback from audiences on that. And that was another part of why we decided, hey, when Rally finished, we were done. We were not telling other bonus arcs in that world.
Yeah.
Astilla, maybe we'll come back to it for like a little tongue-in-cheek live show at some point. But for the most part, Astilla's done. We've told the stories that we want to tell in Astilla. And that, I think, is showing the audience the respect that it deserves, giving them the lenses they want, but then not milking it and like expecting them to just constantly be along for the ride.
Yeah. I think it can be interesting when you come back to that, either come back to the characters 20 years later.
Right.
What have they been doing? What's happened to them? Or you come back to the world itself 100 years later.
Yeah.
How has the world changed by these actions?
Yeah.
I think other actual plays have done similar things successfully. And to me, that's interesting. Like, you can just keep milking the same character thing over and over. But at a certain point, I would imagine it is creatively less satisfying, as well as probably less satisfying to your audience.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Debatably.
I fortunately have not been in that situation, nor do I ever expect to be. But I would imagine it gets tedious after a while. It's like, oh, cool, we're doing the 5th Avengers. Hell yeah.
Hey, once Hollywood picks up a cash cow, they do not let it go until it is utterly
capitalism
sucked dry.
Hey, speaking of cash cows, D&D 2024.
What a cash cow! What a transition! What a cash cow! What a grab!
Woo!
Like, for real. So Hannah and I, my social media manager, we put out this episode just where Hannah was like, "Why did this happen?"
Yeah.
And among other things, not only did I learn so many more horrible stories about Gary Gygax and like the beginnings of D&D and of the history of TSR, and where we basically landed was like, well, this is what D&D does as a system, is just because they sort of learned the hard way. Did you know my favorite piece of this history? Gary Gygax's business plan was to sell 800,000 copies of D&D First Edition, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then like, as other people got involved, they're like, well, what do you do next? How do you get them back? And so this led to like, second edition and then third edition and third-party content, and like, we released the manual and the monster manual and the thing and the thing and the thing.
Yeah.
So long story, it is so about capitalism.
Sure.
People seem to really like 5e. And I have to say, there are a few things in this 2024 that seem better. And you know what? A
little monkeys on typewriters, right? Like, I think there's enough people in the room that are well-intentioned that I think they're gonna strike gold occasionally.
Sure.
Here's my thought on 2024E. I'll give you the light touch version and then the tinfoil hat version, right? The light touch version of 2024E is that Wizards of the Coast are cowards.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no reason why they should not have simply departed from 5e, made a 6th edition, and genuinely fixed many of the problems in 5e. Then partner with a series of actual plays. You still have a devoted following from Dimension 20 for some fucking reason. Partner.
And Critical Role, even as they're releasing their own shit. And like,
they may start to deviate now, but they could have presumably, they've had a relationship with Critical Role for forever. Presumably they could have worked that relationship. So partner with some actual plays.
Yeah.
To move 6e, make those books fucking worth my dollar. It's about the same amount of work, and you have fewer creative constraints. You just have to be willing to call it a separate thing. And this is a thought we're going to come back to when we talk about monks.
They have released a hair-splitting edition. Yeah. It is like so finely splitting hairs, and yet still like fucking up so badly and missing some of the points. Yes.
Tinfoil hat.
Yes.
Tinfoil hat. The person that they brought on to lead most of the new product initiatives within D&D that included what was at the time called 1D&D, which they really tried to backpedal and gaslight us into believing was never a real thing.
Yep.
Was a growth product manager, pretty senior growth product manager at Zynga. That was his primary career. 1D&D from its inception was an attempt to rent extract from D&D. It was an attempt to move away from, we're in the book selling business and we have to genuinely improve upon our books or innovate upon our books on a regular basis. And there's a sense of ownership of the books that comes with that. To, we are a digital goods business where we can charge you subscription to rent extract, and you play primarily a virtual version of this game. If you look at what was going to be released, the focus on D&D Beyond, the retraction,
and their horrible virtual tabletop
their
debacle.
VTT that was going to be basically attempting to be a replacement for a GM, right? They wanted that VTT to really be, I'm playing, the Baldur's Gate of D&D, which should just be Baldur's Gate.
I think they wanted the Wizards branded Baldur's Gate, which they completely misread why Larian did a really good job.
100%. No one at Wizards of the Coast who's been in charge of D&D for a while is particularly good at any of this. But this was the goal. This was the as far as I could tell, this was the goal.
Turn D&D into a gacha game.
When you look at a lot of the ways in which they have improved things, and I think Cinder actually has Cinderblock Sally, who's on Unbalanced Encounters, actually has a public video about this, where he talks about hey, they made some changes that are good, but a lot of changes that they made seem to be taking away human interpretability. And I forget exactly which examples he gives, but he gives some really compelling ones where it's I think there are some where it's the mimics, whatever the mimics hide in plain sight feature is, where it's you can't distinguish it from an object until it moves, right?
Yeah.
They changed the way that language works so that it's more mechanically implemented, so that it's it gains a plus whatever to stealth if it's not moving. That is purely translating into machine parsable language. That is purely them simplifying the game so that they can make it run on an engine instead of being in an imaginative space.
This really doesn't seem that far into tinfoil hat territory, I gotta say. This is the way that so many other games that have any sort of virtual component are moving.
Yeah.
Is to subscription-based models where then you continue to buy content that you don't actually own, but that is only available on the one website when you have to be logged in and have an account there.
Yeah. And that's exactly, this is, we can get bigger and bigger and bigger here, but this is an extension of software as a service. Software as a service largely being the venture capital model that sort of permeated our entire planet from about 2010 to really 2020 and now, where the model of every new startup was, how do we recapture ownership? How do we rent whatever the hell it is that we do on a micro-transactional basis? And this is just D&D. One D&D was them trying to follow that model. Now, they fucked it up, and they fucked up the release, and they got so much blowback from the community that they just kind of ate it and released 2024th edition as kind of 5.5e sort of. But I think that the reason why we ended up with this compromised mess is not because I said earlier they were cowards, and I think that it's actually less. I genuinely believe that it's actually less that they were cowards and more that they really wanted to turn this into games as a service, and they botched it. And this is where we landed instead.
I agree. I think they also, whoever makes the decisions within Hasbro or within Wizards about D&D fundamentally misunderstands why people play the game and who is playing the game.
Yes.
And having said that, what I consistently give them is, I guess actually this makes sense if they're trying to make machine parsable language. It's gotten a lot clearer. The layout and design of the player's handbook and of many of these sections have just become easier to read.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that a lot of that just comes from that's a very clear thing that they can just focus on and sort of get right. And I do think they've done a good job sort of with that, but I also don't particularly think that's worth the $200 or whatever that it would cost me to sort of get back up to full content ownership, which I also put in heavy air quotes. So why did they do it? They did it because they wanted to cash grab. Did it have some positive knock-on effect? Are there some good things in the content that they released? 100%. Are there a lot of things that are kind of arbitrary and a handful of things that I think are kind of bad? Yeah. And so in the end, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag that was born out of a bad motivation.
Yeah.
And we should be very aware of that bad motivation because they will try again. They will keep trying until they get it right.
Absolutely. And having the largest market share, they might manage to keep it,
Well,
but
now.
I'm encouraged by the way I keep seeing people push back. And all that being said, I'm encouraged that some things actually seem to get better. For example, monks. to dig into that a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, I've been looking at this a little bit, and I've been looking at other things. I will say, as we recently discovered, sorcerers as a base class got a big glow up. They actually have some like cool features that are it's not entirely reliant on your subclass.
Yeah.
And so with monks, I've been looking. There's an interesting thing that has happened where like everyone's gotten a couple new special abilities, and some of them have just moved around. And so the big thing for me is like your key point abilities, which are now focus points, do other things now. For example, once you hit 10th level in monk, all three of those things, Flurry of Blows, Patient Defense, and Step of the Wind, are largely the same initially, although you get access to them right at 2nd level.
Yeah.
At 10th level, Flurry of Blows now has 3 unarmed strikes instead of 2.
Yeah.
Patient Defense also gives you temporary hit points equal to rolls of your martial arts die, which at that point is a D8.
I think. Yeah.
Yes, still a D8. And
it does scale nicely.
It really scales so much better. And at Step of the Wind, at 10th level, you can choose a willing creature within 5 feet of you that is large or smaller and move the creature with you.
Yeah.
And that movement does not provoke opportunity attacks. So
clearly a mechanical improvement and also like an action economy improvement.
Yeah.
I think they definitely gave monks a little bit of juice in terms of like what they can do. I have such a weird relationship with monks.
Yeah.
Because Rally ran 80-something episodes with a monk in the party in a world that fundamentally did not have any sense of sort of wuxia martial arts at all. And had 0 East Asian representation at the table, right? None. And did not want to sort of work into that space, right?
Yeah.
And I remember having this conversation with Sam. Sam Oliver is the one who played June, who was a Cobalt Soul monk for that whole campaign. And the first thing that I said when she said, "Hey, could I play a monk?" was, yes, we're never going to use the word key. And we need to think of a way to make your character not a martial artist. Because that is such a narrow Orientalist approach to storytelling around monks that we have to find some other way to engage with the whole fiction of the thing. And so monks, as they're written in D&D, and I'm going to put a big caveat on all of this, which is to say that, like, if you are presumably Chinese specifically, because obviously the monks sit really heavy on Chinese martial arts more than any of the other sort of East Asian martial arts. God knows they don't touch on any other martial arts. If you are, Chinese East Asian and you feel like this represents something from your particular culture and it's a story that you want to tell, fucking ignore me, right? Like I'm talking about guys that look like me, right? Like I'm talking about me here. So much work needs to go in to making the monk not the monk in order to make the fiction work and not be super appropriative and often fit, right? Because it's it is very much one of these things is not like the others, right?
It's a really weird thing to have become a core D&D class in a lot of ways when it was tacked on in later editions, and also just, you kind of look at like Faerun and the Forbidden Realms as like Forgotten Realms as canonical D&D.
Yeah.
It's really Tolkienized Western fantasy, and you're like, why the fuck is there a monastery for some reason here?
Yeah, 100%, and very much that Eastern focused.
Yeah,
that sort of very Eastern focused. God, sorry, we'll have to cut this because the term is leaving my brain. Kung fu. That sort of very Eastern focused, very Kung Fu oriented kind of energy, that sort of monastery. And I think that monks, what I wanted them to do with monks was to take a step back and think about focus and discipline as a fixture of what kind of fiction you could sort of anchor around, and try to represent other types of stories with that, right? If you are, you've got, I have always pictured like Rasputin characters as monks, right? This idea of like, I have this charismatic presence that is so kind of force of will, so kind of born out of the way that I manifest myself on a daily basis, that becomes interesting. It becomes kind of larger than life. There are interesting stories to be told, and certainly a kind of wuxia monk is part of that, right?
Yeah.
But have that
Absolutely.
be the sort of subset that is thoughtfully represented. Why do we need a whole character class that is just punching really fast? And I've been on a fucking tear, but I'm gonna wind it back around. They made the monk punch more.
They made the monk punch more. In fact, they made the monk also punch not only things, but elemental forces.
I mean, don't get me wrong, that was a real problem. That was a real problem of like, the monk can't hit magic stuff well, right? Like, D&D at the end is a combat sim, so I get it. But
it is. And well, so now the change there that I want to call out is like, the empowered strikes is still the thing. In 2014, it's called Key Empowered Strikes, and it just says your unarmed strikes count as magical for the purpose of overcoming resistance and immunity to non-magical attacks.
Yeah.
In 2024, starting at level 6, whenever you deal damage with your unarmed strike, it can deal force damage,
mechanically
or
huge.
its normal damage type.
Huge. Yeah.
Almost nothing is ever resistant to force damage.
Yeah.
However, in its own way, it's like it's a like lateral move, not, I would say, a scale up, because I don't know. I'm as I'm saying it out loud, I want more than just the ability to decide if my punch bludgeons someone or does force damage.
I mean, and that's exactly, I think, my problem with the 2024 monk is that, like, that's reasonable, right? To make it do force damage instead of just non-magical bludgeoning damage, I think is a straight buff. It's not a huge buff, but it's a straight buff, right? Like, force damage, there are things, far more things, that are resistant to even magical bludgeoning damage that almost are never resistant to force damage. But in serving the complaints of the community, in trying to make this version of D&D a fix for 5e, they've sort of lost the plot of, like, what are we actually trying to sell here? What is the fiction that we're trying to sort of manifest here? Because this is such a non-problem to really make a change around, right? Like, if you're gonna get in here and fuck with the wiring of this thing, is this really the condition you're gonna hand it back to me in? Like,
apparently so.
It's not that different, you know? And again, even if you're trying to do this sort of wuxia thing and you're trying to really focus in on that sort of Eastern martial arts, why not phrase it like this? Whenever you deal damage with your unarmed strike, the target cannot be resistant to that damage. You could put a little bit of flavor on the end of it, or sort of in the middle there.
Sure.
Your precision in your strikes means that your target cannot be resistant to that damage. Functionally executing a very similar thing. It's a different thing, but it's a very similar thing. It's again a little bit of a buff over force damage again, but it's telling me something about your intent of the fiction.
It's that it contributes to the storytelling and the buildability of the character in a much different and I would argue better way for both players and DM to latch onto.
Yeah. This is the force damage situation. It's a little video gamey in a way that makes me question why this is being done this way in the first place. Like you're taking it away from the already very narrow fictitious lane that it was in. Well, what are we doing?
And one of the things that always got me that I'm like, oh man, you could have just changed this and you didn't, right? So monks typically, you want a good dexterity, so you hit things, and you want a good wisdom because that's where your key points are based on, or now your focus points.
Yeah,
and yet your saving throws that you're proficient in are strength, and dexterity.
Yeah.
Still, they did not take the easy win of just, let's just make it dexterity and wisdom like it fucking should be.
Or even dexterity and con. Like, what is con? It's not like this is a caster. It's not like giving them con proficiency is gonna fuck their concentration rolls. They don't have concentration rolls. Just give them con proficiency. It's just gonna make them harder to poison. It's fine.
That one is like, that's such a low hanging fruit of 2024 could have done this easy thing that a lot of people. Honestly, like I've had home games and one shots where I'm like, you should just make that your saving throw proficiencies because that's what it is, and that makes the game better.
Yeah, for sure.
And they did nothing.
It's tough. It's tough. I think that the monk it's kind of interesting that we sort of gravitated to the monk because I think that the monk is such a good poster child for why does this thing exist, right? The monk, to my mind, was the most broken core class of 5e. And you could argue the sorcerer, and we could have a discussion about that. I think there's some merit to that argument. But it's one of the two, and I think the monk also suffers from having a far too narrow narrative mandate.
Yeah.
So they tune around the edges and hand it back to us and say, $60, please.
Honestly, to me, it feels a lot like you go to whatever store and you look at like Nerf weapons or something. And you're like, okay, there's the regular like gray and green and black and silver one that's $40. Then there's this pink one that's the Rebel with an LE at the end version that is absolutely totally not marketed towards young girls and is another $30 because it's fucking pink. When fundamentally nothing has changed except the decal.
Right. And this whole book feels overwhelmingly like that. Now, I know it's not entirely, and Cinder and I have had some conversations on his stream where we've discussed so there is some nuance. A lot of their monsters, they did some interesting stuff around where I think they really made a concerted effort to make sure every monster has a ranged option, which I think is a useful thing to do. Some decent design in these books, but it kind of almost feels like it's by accident. And I think the monk shines such a good
themselves.
A little bit, in spite of themselves, right. And I think the monk does such a good job of showing like nobody took a big swing at the biggest swing they needed to take. Like it's just not happening. And I feel like
there's quality of life improvements here and there, and then there's some classes or subclasses that have just absolutely gotten like we did a whole episode on Rangers already. Rangers are unbelievably somehow worse. They are, they become
Hunter's
a more
Mark thing kind of fucked them.
They become a more interesting multi-class option in some ways.
Sure.
But as a class to play, they become even less.
Which, look how they massacred my boy. I fucking love Rangers.
Right.
Rangers in 5e, especially post Tasha's, are some of my favorite characters. They're kind of the best of all worlds.
I've got a Drake Warden in a home game, and he's honestly, I look for it's a fucking Turn of Fortune's wheel. So of course it's like a 1 in 3 chance that I'm actually playing that character in a given session, basically.
Yeah.
But when it rolls around, it's super fun.
Yeah, they're a blast.
Yeah. I think the last thing that I want to like poke at about the monk really is, I'm just kind of keeping an eye on time things, is one of the other things that I've been pleased is kind of what happens at high levels. I think they've really done the high level changes to be like, oh, by the time you hit level 16, 17, like you're functionally a demigod. And some abilities have been altered and changed to reflect that. So for the monk, one, I'm going to keep saying I think everyone getting an epic boon at 19 across the board is a great idea. It really creates the epic scale and the demigod features that you're trying. The monk gets 2 specific things. At 18, you get superior defense when you can spend 3 focus points, and then for 1 minute or until you are incapacitated, you are resistant to everything but force damage. What a cool glow up and what a cool ability at that level, because you're going to be targeted by everything.
100%.
And that's replaced a feature from 2014 where it's the empty body thing. You can become invisible, during which time you're resistant to everything but force damage. You can do astral protection, and it's an unarmored movement bonus, which like great, but
not a huge deal.
Not a huge thing at 18th level.
I think again, incredibly powerful, right? Incredibly powerful. Sounds sick as hell. Right. And I think if you're a monk,
flavor it?
If you're a monk, right, lean the fuck into that and enjoy the hell out of it, right? Drive that shit like a stolen car and just enjoy that moment for sure. I don't want to I'm not stepping on you. I'm stepping on Wizards of the Coast. Yes. Wizards, you have just stepped on the barbarian. Why? You have also ripped all possible flavor out of this thing. And I'm sitting here saying it's flavor that probably shouldn't have been there in the first place, but you don't want to tear it away and not give me something else.
Yeah.
Why do I become a barbarian for a minute?
Well, and speaking of barbarians, the thing that gets better that I was like, well, what? The 20th level capstone is now your dexterity and wisdom increased by 4 to a maximum of 25.
Contributes radically to your unarmored defense.
And this is basically the barbarian's level 20 feature of whatever the thing is, primal that does the same thing, but to your strength and con.
Which again, for the barbarian, that's how you calculate unarmored defense. So it is exactly the same thing.
I will say it's replaced probably my second most shat upon 20th level feature from 2014. My most shat upon is the bards. When you roll initiative and you have no bardic inspiration, you regain 2 or whatever. But monks in 2014, at 20th level, when you roll initiative and have no key points, you regain 4.
And who gives a shit, right? Like that was
Who gives a shit?
100%. That was not good. And this is mechanically way better. I don't have any problem. I mean, do I think this is worth me picking up the player's handbook for? Absolutely the fuck not. But it's fine. It's good, right? Like it's from a tuning perspective. If the original monk was somebody on a homebrew review stream that I was on, and they came to me and they were like, "Hey, how do I make this better?" And I was like, "Go fix these things." And they came back and they showed me this. I'd be like, "This is better." And then I would say,
it's a good
you
version
also
too.
Just copied the fucking barbarians, so I'm not sure why you're wasting my time. Like, you know it's better because you already shipped it. Like, you shipped it 10 years ago. Of course you know it's better. Like, it's just not anything. So,
it's just kind of being spoon-fed, you know? It's, here, take your monk.
And I feel like monk is such a I mean, again, I've said this a couple times, it's such a good example of wasted potential. There's something here. There's something here in the core kernel of someone who is very in control of their body and someone who is very in control of their will and of their discipline. And how do you turn that into a chassis that can support a variety of different sort of play styles in the way that a fighter can support a variety of different play styles, in the way that a ranger can support an insane variety of play styles? How do you sort of find some variation of that? Even barbarian, I've managed to see some pretty incredible, ancestral guardians is a great example of a big distinction, you know?
many of these other classes, there's so much room to flavor your character and flavor the magic or the abilities that you're acquiring as something other than what the book says. And yeah, the way monks are written, I think you have diagnosed it correctly. They are heavily kung fu influence inspired, and the expectation from the writers, I think, is you picked this class because you wanted to live your wuxia film fantasy.
And for that to be the premise of the thing, and for them to systematically strip the copper wire out of it so that all that's left is the memory of my wuxia fantasy is so frustrating.
Yeah. It's one of see now my desire at this point is to go find a system that is doing the monk better, or doing whatever they name the archetype, that they're doing it better.
I'm not a Pathfinder girly, but I would be interested to see whether or not Pathfinder has maybe a better option. I also know that Tales of the Valiant obviously exists. We are using it for the new season of Unbalanced Encounters, at least in one of the arcs. And we do not have a monk. So I have not really read the monk in kind of at length. I do not think it's meaningfully different from the 5e monk, because a lot of Tales of the Valiant is very heavily based on 2014 rules. So there will be changes that are sort of make it fit the system, but it's not sort of ground up stuff. They are in the process of spinning up their Kickstarter for the Player Handbook 2, which is going to ship with 3 new classes. And I do not know what those classes are. I haven't heard anything. I have no idea. But I would love to see something that exists in the space of a wisdom-focused, body-oriented character, because I think that's potentially a very interesting character. And I would love to see a departure from kind of what we know monks to be, if we can find it.
Honestly, I would love to see it structured almost more like the 2014 sorcerer, that the base class gives you the discipline, the focus, the willpower, the control of your body, and the subclass tells you, I'm using that for psychic powers.
Sure.
I'm using that for kung fu and wuxia fantasy.
Sure.
I'm using that because I feel like there's a way that it would cross over really well into a more bardic and charismatic, disciplined leader. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, but then you also get what we had to work really hard to get out of Rally, which is very much the there's also the sort of oh my God, what are they called in Dune? Is it just the Sisterhood in Dune? Is that what they're fucking called?
The Bene Gesserit.
The Bene Gesserit. The Bene Gesserit. Yeah. So you also get the Bene Gesserit out of Dune, right? Where it's like anything that has this discipline motif to it becomes something that's on the table, because that's very rarely punching. And the subclasses could do a lot of sort of that heavy lifting if the core chassis is focused on sort of control of mind, control of body. And I'd love to see that. I think that would be really fucking sick. I would have loved to see it in 2024, but hey, I would have loved to see 2024 kind of mean anything at all.
Yeah, and not just be a cash grab and a weird half into subscription-based modeling. Yeah. I mean, I'm also hearing we should just write a new monk.
Yes, yeah.
Along with the 9 million other projects that you've got going on.
Hey, I'm going to fix the monk. I mean, listen, I genuinely think that if at some point somebody was interested in potentially playing monk for an Unbalanced Encounters game, I'd be 100% down to write something into Tales of the Valiant. But I'm gonna say something that might be a little controversial to the audience here. 2024 edition for me was a great excuse to jump ship. Was a great excuse to say hey, D&D has meant a lot to me in the past. I still have the 2014 books. They're still there. I can play them if I want. But Hasbro is going to start working really, really fucking hard to get me to play the new thing that I don't think is meaningfully better and don't want to spend the money on. And there are so many people out there that are doing incredible design work. I mean, I've named Kobold Press. We've named Magpie Games just in this conversation. But it's not just them, right? I mean, there's obviously the other big ones like Evil Hat and so forth that exist, all the way down to sort of the long tail of individuals that are making games that are worth your time and that are worth you branching out from D&D. It doesn't mean you never have to play D&D again, but there are so many amazing stories and puzzles and experiences for you to have waiting out there for you to
there's
find.
So many that you will give your money directly to the person that created that game instead of the monolith or, behemoth corporation behind that person who's making money. Yeah.
And I think that, as much as you can support indie creators, as much as you can support true sort of innovation and experimentation in the space, you're going to be a better GM or player for having those experiences, for sort of casting a wider net. And you're going to make someone's life materially better who's trying to do interesting stuff in the space. And if that ain't like a positive feedback loop, I genuinely don't know what is. And the simplest change that you could make today, which is what I did personally, and we're doing for Unbalanced Encounters, is move from 2014 to to Kobold Press's Tales of the Valiant. And it's not a one-to-one change, but it's 90% the same. It's actually closer to 2014 than 2024 is.
Kind of hilarious.
It's a smaller change. So if your friends are like, I don't want to learn a new system, you can pick up Kobold Press's Tales of the Valiant. That's going to continue to be supported. They're actively fostering a third-party content ecosystem where people are making sort of source books and things that are going to supplement it.
Instead of yanking around the OGL and SRD over and over again and trying to figure out who owns what rights once you've made a piece of content.
Tales of the Valiant based on Creative Commons because it uses the Creative Commons from 5e, so it's going to have that licensing for you and for the community indefinitely. That's the smallest jump you could make, and it's an easy one. You do it. And then you make the next little jump, and you start to, you pick up. You heard Brennan Lee Mulligan GM Honey Heist somewhere for the McElroys or whatever, and you pick it up and you run Honey Heist, and it's one page and it's easy, and you just start to see what's out there, and you get past the behemoth that really doesn't care that much about you if you're not constantly giving it money.
It's true. I could not agree more, and I think also what a great and positive note to put out in the world. And speaking of supporting independent creators, Patrick, where can people find you or Unbalanced Encounters on the interwebs to support you and listen and see all the cool stuff?
Absolutely. So if you are interested primarily in Unbalanced Encounters, you're going to go to unbalancedencounters.com. We've got links to all of our socials over there, as well as every episode that we have ever released, and little cast blurbs and so forth and so on. And soon, TM, that is also going to be where you can support us financially. We are in the process, albeit the slow process, of migrating away from Patreon to our own platform, which means that basically every dollar you spend is going to go directly to us as opposed to Patreon, which we're very excited about. If you're interested in things that I do more individually, other projects that I'm sort of attached to, including games that I am writing, making, or help make, that was right. Writing, making, or that I am helping make. There we go.
That's the one.
You're going to go to pcperini.com, pcperini.com. I've got links to all the, sort of other things that I do, the audio dramas that I am part of, that I direct. And I believe I have a link to I hope I have a link to the Cunning Folk up. Emily and I have actually just finished she's just finished running the Kickstarter for the game that she wrote and illustrated, that I contributed game design.
Cannot wait for my copy to arrive in the mail.
It's going to be great. Rousing success. And, again, in the scheme of things, the Kickstarter did a couple $1,000s, and, that is not a huge amount of money in the bigger picture of the sort of known universe. Drop in the bucket to a company like Hasbro, quite literally life-changing for Emily. So I think that that's a great example of people came together to help and support. It only took a couple dozen of them, and we did great. So that's unbalancedencounters.com, pcperini.com for my personal stuff.
Oh, yes. And of course, I would be a bad host if I didn't mention you can also support The Roll Report on Patreon if you want. Patreon.com/The Roll Report. And find us on social media platforms around the web at The Roll Report Cast.
Yeah.
Still mad that someone's fucking dog in LA just had at The Roll Report and did not respond to several polite requests about possibly changing it. But what are you going to do? Patrick, thank you so much for joining me and for all the things. It is always a pleasure to have you on. Looking forward to talking about season 3 of Unbalanced Encounters in a year or so.
Listen, let's maybe do a 6-month, and I can talk about the actual show.
Fair enough.
Oh man, am I so excited for that fucking show.
I think I can say I'm doing a little bit of helping out here and there on the sidelines, and I'm very excited to see all. You're
going to get a little bit of a crew credit a little later this year, and that's going to be a blast.
It is. That was, monks are great ish.
Listen, monks are fun. Shoot your monks.
Monks are fun. Monks are fun. Do your thing, and tell your players to drive them like a fucking stolen car.
Yeah,
I think it's my favorite metaphor that's been mentioned on the show so far. It's always inspiring.
By that metaphor, it's so good. All right, you all lovely.
All right, you listeners, you're fantastic. Thank you for joining us again, and keep rolling dice or other things. I don't know. Hooray!
Good night, everybody.